Everybody. This is St. Clement's in Ewell. I'm Father Alexander, and we're going to have our A to Z of Catholicism, and it's going to be I is for images or icons, which I think is a bit of a recondite subject, but I think it's also a very important one because it's something people do ask about. Why is your church full of images? Why is your church full of pictures? Whereas other sorts of churches don't have any pictures at all. And so it does tell you something, and there is a reason for this. There is a very good reason why the Catholic churches are full of images. And there's also a very good reason why Orthodox churches are full of images. And there's also a very good reason why Orthodox churches are full of different types of images, because they have a different type of theology. Now, uh, Protestant churches usually have no images at all. Eastern churches have these icons, these panel paintings, and our churches have a different type of image once again. Now, if we go back to the Old Testament, our Jewish brethren were aniconic, which means they didn't have images. Their God had said in the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods apart from me. You shall have no graven images. You shall have no idols." Therefore, statues and pictures of God to the Jews were anathema and to be destroyed at any wherever they were found. Though there are a lot of stories in the Old Testament of characters in the Old Testament who hung on to their idols and who hung on to their lucky charms and things like that. For example, in the book of Genesis, Rachel, who's otherwise a totally admirable character, is found with a whole load of idols under her saddlebag. Again, in the time of the Maccabees, a whole load of people fall in battle. They're found to have the signs or tokens of the idols of Jamnia, lucky charms around their necks. So for the Jews, this was completely and utterly wrong. There could be no idols. Now, what the Jewish way of doing things is there was a law, no graven images of God. Then they invented another law to sort of protect the original law. And the other law was there could be no images, not just of God, but of anybody or anything. So if you go into a synagogue today, you will not see an image of a living thing, a human being or an animal in the synagogue. You may see some artwork, which would be things like leaves and flowers and things like that. There are no um, images at all. The Muslims took this from the Jews. The Muslims have no images whatsoever. This explains why there are no great Muslim painters or sculptors. And it also explains why there are so many great Muslim calligraphers and tile designers. The best tiles in the world come from Turkey. And I believe the best calligraphy in the world comes from Turkey. Um, but if you go to, but that's it. So their artistic endeavors went into tile design and calligraphy, not into painting and so on. There are no art galleries in Turkey. But it goes so much further. The Wahhabi in Saudi Arabia are so immensely against images that they will not allow you to take your teddy bear into the country. Your teddy bear will be confiscated at customs if you try and enter Saudi Arabia with a teddy bear, because it's an image, it's an idol, and of course you might be tempted, I suppose, to worship it. So now we Christians are completely different, and thank goodness we're completely different. And the key quotation is as follows. It says in Colossians 1:15, he, meaning Jesus, is the image or icon in Greek of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. And that's the key quote, which underlines and undergirds the entire Christian theology of images and icons. Now, God is invisible. We know that. God is pure spirit. God does not have a body. We know that, don't we? Therefore, God cannot be seen. Maybe he can be felt and so on. But at Christmas, the Word became flesh. Jesus came amongst us as a man, and therefore God let himself be seen. Now, Jesus came among us as a man, as a human being, like any other human being, apart from sin. And as a human being, he could be pictured, just like any other human being. He could be described and he could be pictured. And very early in the life of the church, there were pictures drawn on the walls of the Christian catacombs of Jesus the Good Shepherd, because anyway, people knew what Jesus looked like and they passed this on, and there were pictures of Jesus. Now, because God has made himself known, and because Jesus is the fullness of God and he's the image of God, we can have not an image of God, but we can have an image of an image of God. We can have an image of Jesus, who is the image of God. Does that make sense? Good, good. Okay, now, but okay, we can have images, but is it desirable to have images? I mean, you can do a whole load of things, but is it desirable to do that sort of thing? Are images useful? Are images desirable in churches? Well, the answer is, I think, overwhelmingly, yes, they are, because people have voted with their feet on this one. People are very keen in the history of the church for images. Now, if we go back a bit to the 7th century in Constantinople, um, the emperor of Constantinople decided that he would do away with all images. And this led to an outbreak of what's called iconoclasm, which means the smashing of images. This actually meant most of these images were painted images, that the defacing of painted images. And this was carried out by the order of the government of the day. Now, we don't know why this happened, this iconoclasm happened in the Byzantine Empire, throughout the Byzantine Empire. We don't know why it happened. People have said, well, maybe it was that the authorities wanted to purify religion and religious practice and make things more austere. What happened was, because as you know, to every action there's an opposite and equal reaction, and then some, is that another movement arose, which was called iconodoulia, which means the love of icons. So a lot of people rescued their icons from the soldiers who came to destroy them and buried them. And then when the iconoclasm was over, these icons were taken out and amidst great rejoicing and became even more revered than before. There are very few Greek icons that predate the iconoclasm. And the ones that there are very, very valuable. But after the iconoclasm was over, there was a huge outbreak of iconodoulia, and there were lots and lots of icons. When above the gateway to the palace in Constantinople, two soldiers were taking down or destroying the icon of Jesus above the door, a lady called Theodosia, now known as Saint Theodosia the Iconodule, she attacked the two soldiers and killed them, whereupon they killed her or something, and she became a saint for this heroic deed in defending the icons. So iconodoulia then became the order of the day in the Eastern Church. Now, the one of the things about the Eastern churches, you've seen these Greek and Russian icons, haven't you? Now, the Greek and Russian icons were painted, the ones before iconoclasm were obviously very old. After iconoclasm, they tried to recreate the old ones. This was before Michelangelo and people like that came along, before the invention and before Giotto and those Italian painters who invented perspective. The Greek icons have no perspective, they are flat. Now, this is quite important. Nowadays, people are still painting icons, and they're doing so in the traditional manner of painting icons without perspective, and deliberately so. In the West, that's us, the West. Let's not forget we are the West. We have perspective ever since the time of, it was Giotto, I think, or was it Cimabue, invented perspective in about 1300 or something like that. So we have paintings, our paintings have depth, don't they? Moreover, we, obviously the Greeks, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans had sculpture, but not in Byzantium much. But in the West, sculpture continued. There are lots of lovely sculptures from the catacombs of Jesus the Good Shepherd. And then, of course, sculpture carried on during the Middle Ages, and sculpture has depth. It's three-dimensional. It can't be two-dimensional. You have reliefs and so on. You have sculptures. And so we have sculptures of, for example, Jesus, of the Virgin Mary, and so on. And these sculptures are not two-dimensional. They're quite lifelike. Now, this is quite important. One of the things is that in the Western Church, our painting and our sculptures are meant to be lifelike, whereas the ones in the East are meant to be mystical, remote, not like the everyday. Because the East emphasizes Jesus, the Son of God, his divinity, whereas the West emphasizes Jesus, the man, his humanity. He's the Son of God, but in his humanity, we see his divinity. Now, if you think about this, and if it goes for Jesus, it also goes for the saints, and it also goes for the Blessed Virgin Mary. If the great pictures of Catholicism all, sometimes shockingly, show the humanity of Jesus Christ and the saints. I'm thinking in particular of that very great picture, probably the greatest Catholic picture of all time, and that is the Madonna of the Pilgrims by Caravaggio. Now, you can look it up on the internet when you get home, and if you're watching this on YouTube, have a look at it on the internet, Madonna of the Pilgrims. It's that famous picture where a man and a woman are kneeling on a step which of a house, which is the Holy House of Loreto, which the plaster has fallen off the brickwork to the right of the doorway. So it's a shabby house. And they have walked to Loreto, and you can see their bare feet, which are covered in dirt. The man is holding a stick. And it's a man and his mother, probably, because the woman's much older. And standing in the doorway of the Holy House of Loreto is the Virgin Mary holding a rather large child. And the Virgin Mary, and so in other words, this couple have walked to Loreto and they've seen the vision of the Virgin Mary and Jesus living in the house of Loreto. They're standing at the doorstep. The Virgin is holding the child like that. And the Virgin is standing with most of her weight on one foot. And Caravaggio used as his model a very well-known Roman courtesan. Do you know what a courtesan is? You might have to Google it. Do you know what a courtesan is? Yes. Um, and I mean, I think she is very much. She wasn't a courtesan actually. She was much lower down than the courtesan. She is very much a working class woman of the type that you could see perhaps 50 years ago in places like Trastevere in Rome. And she's very beautiful, but she's quite rough looking, but very beautiful. And I think what Caravaggio is underlining there is the humanity of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the humanity of Jesus by extension, and the Holy House, which is to be revered because it reminds us that Christ came among us and dwelt amongst us. The Holy House is shabby and wounded and damaged, and Jesus's life was a life of an ordinary man, not somebody who lived in a sort of a separate dimension. Now, if you think of the sculpture of Jesus done by Michelangelo, that's the famous one of the risen Christ, or indeed of the one of Jesus' dead body on the Blessed Virgin, the Pietà, it is to emphasize the majesty of Christ, the physicality of Christ as well. Now, you can't really say in the Greek icons that Jesus looks very physical, but in the Catholic sculpture, Jesus looks very physical indeed. You know, his limbs are made out of marble and so on. So again, the most famous thing that Michelangelo created, the David of Michelangelo, is a very physical statue. It's not an idea of David. It's this, it's this, what I think Americans call a jock, a baseball player or something like that, a sportsman. And this is the word became flesh, is what these icons, these images are telling us. Those are very, very famous images. If you look at after the David, the most famous image in the Catholic world is by Bernini, which is, you must know it, it's the Saint Teresa in ecstasy. It is not only the greatest sculpture ever made, it also is well, she's in ecstasy, a physical sensation in prayer, and the angel is about to stab her through the heart, and so on and so forth. This was the vision she had. It's it's completely removed from the serenity of the Greek icons. There's nothing serene about Teresa in ecstasy. It's not serene at all. It's not calm. It's tempestuous. So I think possibly, whereas the Greek icons are about calm, tranquility, contemplation, I might be totally wrong about this, the Catholic images are often about passion. I think that's it. They are there to stir you up and lift your heart and mind to God. They're there in many ways to disturb you. I mean, that famous one of the Holy House of Loreto, the Madonna of the Pilgrims, was she really like that? It's a challenge for you to think, did Christ really come and live in a grotty house with a rather very beautiful but nevertheless rather slatternly mother who was obviously not out of the top drawer? The answer to that is yes. Well, not slatternly, but you know what I mean. But they were poor. They didn't have a butler. So I think it's in other words, it's reminding us of what God did for us by coming down and living amongst us. So that's the difference, I think, between Western and Eastern. Now, the the icon, the image, is a wordless theology asking you to enter into the mystery of the incarnation, is what I think. Now, um, the Protestants objected to all this. The Protestants said, no, 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 we mustn't have icons, images, paintings, statues in our churches. Absolutely not. If you go to Ely, there's a chapter house next to the cathedral. And in the chapter house, it's sort of hexagonal, I think. There's statues, 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 statues. And each one has had its head knocked off. Though they got the village idiot in with a large hammer and got him to knock the heads off all these statues. And so the whole place has been vandalized. In places like Oxford and Cambridge, no, they didn't smash the statues. In King's College, Cambridge, they didn't smash the stained glass, but they did in Ely, I believe. And many places they smashed the stained glass. They painted over or defaced the wall paintings, some of which have now been uncovered, and they smashed all the statues. They particularly smashed the things which are very rare. There are hardly any left. The Nottingham alabasters. Nottingham used to produce alabaster, and these alabaster statues were very, very much prized. There were quite a lot. There were a lot in England. There are very few left. There is one crucifix that predates English crucifix that predates the Reformation. One. And there are quite a few English alabaster works on the continent, but not in England. I think there's one or two statues of the Virgin Mary which predate the Reformation. The rest were smashed. 90% of Britain's art was destroyed by iconoclasts in the reign of the boy king Edward VI and later. The stained glass survived largely because it was too expensive to replace. But where they could, they smashed the stained glass um, or defaced it, literally rubbing out the faces of the people, because they said, "Oh no, we can't have statues. It's against the law of God. It's condemned by the Old Testament. It's superstitious nonsense." Now, a few observations are necessary. When you smash the stained glass and destroy the statues and deface the wall paintings, the church will look rather ugly. It'll look rather bare. But for the Protestants, that's what they wanted. They wanted essentially what they later constructed in the 18th century, what's called a preaching box. That's a completely white, completely square or cuboid or rectangular church where there was a reading desk and where somebody preached. So, like a lecture theatre, a church should be like a lecture theatre. And of course, in a lecture theatre, you don't want any distractions from what the guy who's standing at the reading desk is droning on about. You don't want the great thing about a Catholic church, where the guy gets up to drone on, you can look around and say, "Well, that's nice. Oh, I hadn't noticed that before. Oh, I like that. I wonder what that is over there. Let me get my glasses." And then by the time the guy stopped droning on, you think, "Oh, good." You can get on with the man. So that's great, isn't it? And children like that. When you say, "What are you talking about?" So they just look at the stained glass and things like that. Okay, but for the Protestants, no distractions. Now, sensory deprivation is sometimes quite good, and in Holy Week, all our images are supposed to be covered up. We don't very rarely do this, but in some churches they do it. You're supposed to cover up the images so that you will not be distracted. A sort of death, if you like, sensory deprivation. But generally speaking, we really do need to look at things. We are people who look. We like looking at things. Remember what the great and good Mary Kenny said. She said, "Hello magazine, you look at it, it's got lovely pictures, it's Catholic. And therefore, that if you're a Catholic, you like looking at things. And every picture tells a story. So not looking at things just seems to be crazy, because we're people who are meant to look, aren't we? Okay. Now, the other thing is, it's not idolatrous. It's ridiculous to say somebody who prays in front of a crucifix is being idolatrous, is worshipping the crucifix. Everybody knows that Jesus on the cross and the crucifix are rather different things. Jesus on the cross is, is a spiritual reality. The crucifix is there to remind you of the spiritual reality. The picture of Our Lady is there to remind you that the Virgin Mary is now in glory in heaven. Nobody Your photograph of your lovely wife at home reminds you, when your lovely wife is absent, of what she looks like, in case you'd forgotten. But you would not confuse a picture of your wife with the actual person who is rattling around in the kitchen. Okay, you wouldn't. You just wouldn't. Okay, we can tell the difference between picture and reality. The picture of Jesus Christ is to remind us of the reality, not to substitute the reality. And I think that's really very basic and very straightforward. No Catholic has ever worshipped an object. Now, it's true that I think it is true that objects can become the center of a massive devotion. So, for example, the icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa in Poland is a mass. People go for miles just to look at this picture, but really they're drawn by what the picture symbolizes, what the picture represents. And similarly, amongst with statues, in places like in Malta and in southern Italy and in Spain, these statues also command a great deal of devotion and attention. But the point is, when you see the statue of Saint Sebastian, or you see, for example, the relics of Saint Agatha, which came out just recently for the feast in Catania, you don't you there's a lovely hymn to Saint Agatha, and it says, "We will see you in heaven." It says is the conclusion. We will see you in heaven. I mean, she was on earth, but now she's in heaven. Her relics are a reminder of the fact she was on earth, but she's no longer on earth. She is in heaven. All the saints are in heaven. They're not here on earth. One of the things about idol worship is, of course, we will create a God who will belong to us and who will be earthbound. I think the Catholic image liberates your soul so that you can rise above your earthboundedness. That's very clear with Saint Teresa of Ecstasy, in ecstasy. When you see that, you yourself are supposed to go into ecstasy. Or perhaps if you don't go into ecstasy, you're supposed to wonder why you're not going into ecstasy and what's wrong with your life. Correct? Yes. Now, finally, because I will now stop because I've been talking for 24 minutes, The church is the patron of the arts. And historically, the church has been a massive patron of the arts. Bernini, who was a devout Catholic, he also produced quite a few secular sculptures, and he was also an architect. But Bernini's best work was for the church. And it was a very good thing. They didn't say to Bernini, no, go away, we don't want you here. No, they encouraged him. Again, Guido Reni, one of the greatest painters, he also painted secular subjects, but he was also a great religious painter. The most beautiful painting in the National Gallery of the Birth of Christ is by Guido Reni. And if you go into it's in that room with the Caravaggio and so on. Also, the Caravaggio there in the National Gallery with Jesus breaking the bread for the disciples of Emmaus. That's quite extraordinary. Jesus with no beard and with the chicken next to him and so on. It's very strange. This art makes the world a better place. There's no doubt about that. I mean, without art, we would all be less poor, or sorry, less rich. Art, but art is not just an expression of reality, it's an expression of prayer. And I think that's really important. Art is a help to prayer. Now, when we sit and pray, what do? We make images in our heads. So if we have an image in front of us, that may spur us on to make an image in our head. We need to imagine, i.e., make an image of Jesus, Mary, the saints, the angels, heaven, et hell, etc. It's really important. Our imagination is stirred up. And also, worship is supposed to be an aesthetic experience. It should be, I went to church and what was it like? It was beautiful. And if you do go to certain churches are breathtakingly beautiful. I can't think of any just offhand. Yes, the Capilla del Rosario in Puebla. It's the most breathtakingly beautiful church I've ever been in Saint Dominic in Puebla, the Chapel of the Rosary in Puebla. It is quite literally jewel encrusted. It's amazing. Worship is supposed to be beautiful. Um, and it's not good enough to say, oh, well, this place is shabby or dirty or whatever, and we just leave it like that because God doesn't care. No, worship should be beautiful. Everything should be the best possible we can do. That said, having said that, a lot of Catholic works of art are really low standard. Now, this is sometimes some of them are quite good in the sense that they are what do you call it, naive art or they're primitive art. I'm thinking particularly of those shrines you go to where people who've had I don't know, they fell off a ladder and they survived, and they draw a picture or paint a picture of them falling off the ladder and the Virgin Mary smiling down at them and saving their lives, and then they present it to the shrine. These ex votos, they're called. They're very, very, very. They're often stolen from shrines and then sold. They're very, very, very valued, particularly there in Italy, South America, and places like that. Some Catholic art of the naive, primitive type is very good, but some of the mass-produced type is just awful. Now, the great and good Pompeo Battoni, who was a truly great artist, he only ever painted one bad picture, and that was the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which is in the Jesuit church in Rome. It's a very bad picture, but he was a great artist, but he couldn't do it there. It's just awful. You've seen it reproduced hundreds and hundreds of times. A lot of Catholic statuary and a lot of Catholic painting is really rather bad. However, these ugly pictures or aesthetically limited pictures do express what people feel, and therefore they are not to be sniffed at. And it's a very bad idea to say, oh, well, we're going to get rid of this picture because it's ugly. But old Mrs. Jones might think it's the most beautiful thing she's ever seen and she loves it. And therefore, we're not going to get rid of it. Because Catholicism, art is about passion rather than thought. Art is about feeling, and Catholicism is the religion of feeling. I've spoken for just under half an hour. Have you got any questions? What's your question? Yeah. Yes. Okay, you're created as an image of God. What is created as an image of God in you is your soul, which is beautiful. Uh, and the other thing is, of course, Oscar Wilde did say, we live in an age of surfaces. And we've also been told beauty is skin deep. And we are very superficial people in that we chase after beauty and we try and keep it going as long as possible. Look at, people like Joan Collins, who I think is, how old is Joan Collins now? And she's looking fabulous. And do you remember Ronald Reagan? Yeah, I know. I mean, do you remember Elizabeth Taylor towards the end? If you think about Ronald Reagan when he was in his 70s, and so somebody said a triumph of the embalmer's art. I mean, the thing is, we put too much emphasis on an idea of beauty, and the idea of beauty keeps on changing, and that's very superficial, not something we should be trying to emulate too much. Don't forget, the greatest of actresses, Lauren Bacall, looked fabulous, aged 80. And even what's her name looks pretty good, doesn't she? She's 78, Joanna Lumley. I don't think she's had much work done. I don't know. But, the idea of being natural, being yourself, that is, we should try and encourage people to believe that that is what they should do. I think we should particularly encourage teenagers in that regard, because sometimes they are a little bit angst up about their appearances, not just girls, but boys as well. And it's and don't forget, it's once upon a time, the 18th century, all girls were supposed to be plump, and they all wore those hideous empire line dresses, which we still wear as maternity dresses, don't we? I mean, they all look frightful, and they all wore those horrible coal scuttle bonnets. I mean, who thought they were a good idea? They looked terrible. And then in the 19th century, they all wore crenolines. They looked terrible. I mean, and yet, and if you look at old photographs of yourself, you think, my God, did I really look like that? That hair and things like that. You look at the 1960s, everybody looked terrible. 1980s, even worse. Now we all look wonderful. So it all changes. It's all very superficial. I think the beauty of the saints is seen in their morality, their goodness. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, go on. Yeah, yeah, yes. Yes. Yes, this is true. There's a reason behind this. We perceive Jesus as a Western-looking person, and he's painted as a Western-looking person. Why is this rather than somebody who's a Middle Easterner? And there have been attempts to portray Jesus as a Middle Easterner. Um, this is very interesting. One of the things is, if you look at the Blessed Virgin Mary, in China, she's portrayed as a Chinese woman. In Mexico, she's portrayed as a Mexican woman. In Africa, she's portrayed as black. And that's fine. When Bernadette saw the Virgin Mary in Lourdes and was asked to describe her, she said she was about 12 years old, which is very odd. And you don't often hear that. Well, why did she say this? Because Bernadette saw the Blessed Virgin Mary as the idealization of herself. Now, the painter will paint Jesus Christ as the idealization of himself, and which is, of course, because Jesus Christ being the ideal human being and who you want to be, that is what you're aiming at, so to speak. And the Blessed Virgin is often painted as the ideal beauty and so on. Possibly the greatest Virgin Mary is the Madonna del Parto, Our Lady of the Giving Birth, which is in the same church as the Madonna of the Pilgrims. The Madonna of the Pilgrims is pretty good as well. And that is a statue which is quite extraordinary in its majesty, and it's absolutely beautiful. There's also a very beautiful statue of Our Lady in Santa Maria Maggiore called the Queen of Peace. That's absolutely beautiful too. The Virgin Mary. I mean, what is the Virgin Mary and Jesus? I mean, if we are the people we are, we will paint the Virgin Mary to look like us. Yes, 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 yeah, yes. The Irish Madonna. Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. That is true. The Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth is absolutely lovely. It's a very modern church, but it's very really really nice. Incidentally, the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth is full of really good art, modern art, really good. The Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem does not contain a single work of decent art. It's full of junk, which is a great of a pity. There's some decent art in certain mosaics and so on and so forth, but in some of the other churches. But the so basically, um, what Jesus actually looked like, we um, we don't know, because one of the interesting things is the people who are writing the Gospels had absolutely no interest in anybody's physical appearance. The Romans had an interest in their physical appearance in the sense that although the statues of the Roman emperors probably didn't look like the Roman emperors at all, they were idealized. But what the only, some people would say that the only authentic image of Jesus is the Holy Shroud of Turin, which is, and people have noticed that the Holy Shroud of Turin bears a striking resemblance to quite a lot of icons of Jesus and so on. But somebody with a beard and long hair and so on. But Caravaggio paints Jesus without a beard in that picture of the National Gallery, the Supper at Emmaus. Quite extraordinary. Any other?
Can I ask,
Yes.
if you go to a lot of cathedrals,
Yeah.
you get stories in all the
Yeah.
windows and everything.
Yes.
But presumably that was in England as well.
Yes.
So to wipe up Catholicism, you had to paint over the
Yeah.
other. So people didn't know about the Holy Ghost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. The one of the things you have in all churches, old churches on the continent, some old churches, is what the French called le bon dessiné, the comic strip. So you have the story of the Bible in various things. There's certainly in Santa Maria Maggiore, and sometimes on one side you have the Old Testament, on the other side you have the New Testament, and so illustrations of Bible stories. This is the case in one church in Surrey. The old parish church of Albury has got a picture of Noah, Jonah, and the whale, I think, which has been which was plastered over or painted over. There are a few medieval wall paintings left, very damaged, but they were mainly of biblical scenes. And the Doom. Where's that? Oh, in oh. Yeah, Whiteleaf. Okay. Oh, yes. The Doom was a very popular thing, which was the Last Judgment, which of course you have on the wall of the Sistine Chapel, and in the Sistine Chapel you also have Old Testament, New Testament, etc., etc. Every surface is painted in the Sistine Chapel. One of the reasons for that is paint was cheap. Okay, you had to get in Michelangelo to do it to make it worthwhile, but paint was cheap. But you also have churches which were entirely mosaic and marble, such as the most famous one being Monreale in Sicily, and also you've got Cefalù in Sicily. Those are quite extraordinary. And then you could just have decoration, like the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. But churches are meant to be highly decorated. Yes. 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 Ah, yes. Very famous, the Italian Prisoners of War. Am I not right in saying St. Raphael's in Surbiton is similar? I've never been there. Anybody been? Okay. St. Raphael's in Surbiton. Isn't it painted inside by Italians? Yeah, yeah. There are some very
Raphael is not after someone who's called
ah
his son
uh-huh
killed or something.
uh-huh
And you get that depicted.
uh-huh 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 people love telling a story, and every picture tells a story.
Mm.
So, what do you think then about images and icons? And I mean, we have we have three very fine images in our church. We've got the Blessed Trinity against the top wall. We've got the two martyrs, Saint Philip Howard and Saint Clement, and with an angel between them who is holding the crown of martyrdom and the palm of martyrdom. And then we've also got in the baptistry, we've got the baptism of Jesus, and those are really quite fine. So we're quite lucky. We're not so lucky in our statuary, I don't think, or and we've got other things and so on. I don't know how much people really get out of those. I think the main one is it certainly adds to the dignity of the church. The one at the side, we need to do something about it because we've got all those things cluttering it up, haven't we? Which rather detract from it. Those music stands and so on and so forth. We need to get a proper altar cloth and so on because it should be more of a focus. Yeah, that's the Lady Chapel. Yes, yes. One of our parishioners insisted on moving the benches at 90 degrees to the wall, and so we do. But we need to get rid of all the junk in there. Well, I don't know if it's junk, but I don't know if it's ever used all that whatever. But anyway, any other comments? Yeah. Yes. Which is to see me is to have seen the Father. Jesus is the image of the Father. Jesus is the icon of the Father. Jesus is, but whereas an icon is points you to the reality, Jesus is also the reality. Now, that's a mistake we don't make. When you see an icon of Jesus, you don't think, that, when you do say, who's that in the picture? That's Jesus. But you do know that it's not a Jesus. It's a picture of Jesus. Anyway, yeah, yeah. But nobody is worshipping pictures. Oh yes, yeah. The yeah. I think when in Malta as well, the statues and so on, which are taken, the I remember I read this article in the Times of Malta, which I'm sure most of you still read, yeah, online, and it was during the bombing in the Second World War. The statue of Our Lady was removed from the parish church of Cospicua, which was about 50 yards from the dockyard, and therefore in grave danger of being bombed. And the statue was removed to a safer place. And then the statue was brought back after the bombs had ceased. And it was brought back in a procession and from Birkirkara to Cospicua, which took about all day. And thousands of people took part in this procession. And it said when the statue entered Cospicua, the atmosphere became ecstatic, which is quite extraordinary. And the point about it, obviously the statue is incredibly valuable. I've seen it, incredibly important to the people. The one in no in the Immaculate Conception in Cospicua. It's a very beautiful church, and it's because it's what the statue represents, which is the presence of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the midst of her people, and the icon of Jesus represents the presence of Jesus Christ in his people. The Blessed Virgin Mary is in heaven, but the Blessed Virgin Mary is also among us. You know, she's not far away. So I think that's incredibly important as well. These statues are teaching us something. They're teaching us something. Right. Any other points? Oh, when did we do that? Oh yes. Oh, we've got a statue of Our Lady of Walsingham. Ah, yeah. Yes, I mean, processions are rather important. What we'll do, I think, is because we've got a bit of grounds here, we will have a Blessed Sacrament procession for Corpus Christi. We must have one. We must. Unfortunately, if you do need a bit of grounds, a bit of space to do it. But you can walk around the church and so on and so forth. It'd be quite nice after the 10:30 mass. It would be good. Yeah, I mean processions really hack off secularists. And of course, one of the things that Benito Juarez did is he made processions illegal in Mexico. And they still are illegal in Mexico, but they have them. And it's quite extraordinary when you see a procession in Mexico because everybody is very excited by it. And it's a sign that, the processions are still here. And where is Benito Juarez now? Where is he now? Eh? Yes. And Mussolini's father was a great admirer of Benito Juarez. That's why he called his son Benito after Juarez. There you go. Well, I mean, Benito Juarez was not a good person. Anyway, well, I mean, no, maybe he was, but no, he wasn't. But he was very much against processions. They hated processions. They wanted, the procession is it's God is in our midst. That's what it's saying. Any other points, or shall we finish there? Okay. Good night, everybody, and thanks for coming. Bye. If you're watching us online, lovely to see you. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll be back.